What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the first soundtrack album by Snoop Dogg and Death Row Records. Basically, this project is called Murder Was the Case, and it came out in the fall of 1994. Now, this is the follow-up to Snoop Dogg's hit album Doggy Style, which is approaching its 30-year anniversary. So I wanted to get to this project just because I noticed there's not a ton of talk about this particular album. It's pretty much like a damn near classic soundtrack album. It's pretty much like a classic soundtrack album. I definitely feel for like movie soundtracks that this is about as good as it gets in terms of that relative prospect. I mean, I do think in some cases you might be able to find some better, but I look after just in terms of the impact, the revolutionary type stuff that it did, and just the fact that Snoop Dogg was trying a clever idea this soon and this suddenly just happened to be a really good look. Now, because of Snoop Dogg's pending murder case that he had in like 1993 to about 1997 almost, the concept about it kind of was that Snoop Dogg just didn't work on his follow up to Doggy Style as quickly as he needed to. So obviously, for folks that wanted like another Dr. Dre produced album like Doggy Style from '93, it didn't quite happen. But this is like the closest thing. I kind of feel like this has some Dr. Dre beats on here. Dr. Dre is definitely in his prime on this particular project, and there's some new stuff on here like there's kind of some further unveilings of like at the time this was new as Nate Dogg and the Dog Pound were kind of being unveiled and stuff like that, and it just was starting to show off the more nasty kind of appeal of Death Row Records as far as that kind of went. So this is like the third helping of like Death Row at the time, because basically it kicked off with Dr. Dre and the Chronic in '92, and then it was kind of realized further with Doggy Style in '93, and then as the tail end of '94 came out, it went to Murder Was the Case by Snoop Dogg and Death Row Records, and then further in '95 you got like the Dog Pound album Dog Food and so on, and Tupac and some of that type of stuff. But I look after it at the time, I kind of felt like there just was some trouble kind of afoot with Death Row, just because of the concept that Dr. Dre just was not putting out his follow up. He was working on it, but it just never came to fruition, and it just kind of felt like there was just more drama and kind of controversy surrounding Death Row Records as opposed to like the hit music. It was definitely like a pretty gangster rap kind of label, and just a lot of like the antics that went along with it between Suge Knight, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, some of those type folks, the beef with Eazy-E, some of these type things that just kind of happened. There was just a lot of things that were kind of tumultuous around this time, but it was a hit project. And I definitely feel like this project was particularly good, but Snoop Dogg was kind of preoccupied, but he still managed to put out some initial stuff in 1994. So there are some brand new Snoop Doggy Dogg songs on here. It's basically like a second helping of what he was on Doggy Style, just a little bit more revamped. I definitely feel like the production on here is pretty outstanding. There's just some good bops on here, few new Dr. Dre beats, and it showcases another hit producer on Death Row Records, which was Daz Dillinger, which I would basically say for Death Row, he was probably the second best producer on Death Row Records. He definitely has some hit beats on here, and it just kind of showcases some further valves as far as some of these things that were to kind of happen throughout the '90s. So this is definitely one of the better releases on Death Row, I'd have to say. This is kind of one where if you know Doggy Style and you know the Chronic, but you don't know a ton of other projects as far as the rest of this label and the stuff that happened throughout the '90s is kind of concerned, this is a good one to look up. It's kind of a hard find. It's a little bit more expensive. I mean, this is one that can run you. It's not expensive in the term of it being like super, like it's not like $150 album, but it's still something, considering that it's 30 years old, still having to pay 25, $35 for it is still not, it's kind of out of character for such a thing. But this kind of hodgepodge, this kind of one that's just kind of less talked about and is just kind of forgotten about in most times. So I definitely wanted to review this and just kind of remind folks that Snoop Dogg was quite ill in 1994, despite him being kind of quieter around this time. So there were 3 singles on this project, or really I would almost say there were 4 singles. It's just kind of an in-between kind of situation, just because one was kind of a double single where it had the Nate Dogg song and then the Dog Pound song. So that's what they were trying to promote. Basically in '94, they were trying to get the next cats up on deck for who was going to come out after Snoop Dogg, and basically that would have to be the One More Day and What Would You Do single. Now, What Would You Do was the hit single that was the lead single that carried this album in the fall of '94. Snoop Dogg does have some new songs on here, but he doesn't really carry it with like a new lead single to kind of have like he was in like Gin and Juice and Who Am I and some of those type ones. But I would have to say it's some good stuff just to kind of see. This is a very clever album. It's innovative and it just works. I definitely recommend seeing the movie also as far as that's kind of concerned, because this is a part of a movie, so it's just kind of a 20-minute movie, something like that, about Snoop Dogg, or Snoop Dogg actually acts in the role and does that thing as far as that kind of goes. But there is a soundtrack and this is obviously it. So, but yeah, the first single would be One More Day and What Would You Do. So One More Day is by Nate Dogg. What Would You Do is by the Dog Pound. I'll talk about What Would You Do first. So What Would You Do is kind of a sneering, kind of horrorcore G-funk song, I would have to say. It's a good intro to Dog Pound, I would have to say, and it fits the album real well. So this is just kind of a horrific kind of song, and horrific, I mean that in a good way. It just really has like that kind of oozing, kind of characteristic type feel for G-funk. But the thing I like about this particular album is just, the thing I like about this album is it has some G-funk on here, but it's just kind of in a more horrorcore type sense, which is something that not all G-Funk kind of does. I feel like this particular project, I mean, Snoop Dogg did it with Murder Was the Case, and he did it a little bit later on, but this not commonly. This is an extra kind of Valve, some of the Brother Lynch hung type stuff, and folks like that, Esham and those type people, I would have to say, is just kind of interesting and get some of that from like G-Funk and like banner rap labels like Death Row as far as that kind of goes. And this is definitely an example of that with What Would You Do. Now, Dog Pound definitely didn't do horrorcore that much, but this is definitely a pretty G-Funk kind of hit that just is vintage out of the 90s. This really feels like a classic California hit. And then One More Day featuring Nate Dogg is kind of a sullen, dreary late day commerce. I would have to say it's a makeshift. It has a makeshift workaday kind of feel, and it has a makeshift kind of workaday feel in like a G-funk sense. I just would have to say if you appreciate a more blue collar kind of workaday type feel in like a makeshift sense, I would definitely say this is a pretty good tune for that. I like the concept of Nate Dogg kind of doing this one. It just kind of talks about some kind of dreary kind of G-funk kind of tales as far as just like growing up in California, as far as that kind of stuff. This kind of happens, not necessarily growing up, but just regular kind of days in California, just in like a more kind of 4 o'clock p.m., 5 o'clock p.m. type setting, just kind of after hours, just winding down kind of sense, but just kind of being a little bit sullen about it, just not really that appreciative. I mean, there's other songs that Nate Dogg did, like there's one like These Days, it's a little bit has a little bit more pep towards it. But I definitely think for a Nate Dogg solo song, this is just kind of a dreary kind of one. But I do like the concept of it, just because I do think this is a clever one, just because I can't think of too many Nate Dogg kind of makeshift songs. So it's interesting kind of get this one, just a good commerce one. Probably one of the bigger hits off this album. I think a lot of people would probably definitely enjoy this one, is Natural Born Killers. And this is a song that has Dr. Dre and Ice Cube, which they haven't teamed up since like the NWA days. So this is definitely a good one. This is a very sneering kind of hit, definitely a dynamite kind of recent collabo between Dr. Dre and Ice Cube. It's just a very monstrous kind of morbid song. I would have to say this is probably one of the better beats that Dr. Dre did out of the 90s. This is just a very effectual one, has ravenous energy, and it's just an overall effectual kind of hit. It's a great casual song that just hits extremely well. This is a nice one with a lot of bite, and this kind of has like the context of just being like just a real central song for California. Just the energy of this song is off the meter, and I would have to say it's just probably one of Dr. Dre's better songs out of the 90s. I mean, he didn't pop up a ton in the 90s, but this felt like almost every appearance that Dr. Dre had in the 90s was just a pretty effectual song, and this is another good example of that. And Ice Cube was pretty good on here too. To definitely talk about him, Ice Cube just kind of makes like a kind of random appearance on here, but it works. It just works pretty damn well. He definitely was doing his stuff in the 90s. He had like the Lynch Mob and West Side Connection and stuff like that in the Friday soundtrack that he was doing around this time. So Dr. Dre appeared on the Friday soundtrack, and Ice Cube appeared on like the Death Row, Murder Was the Case soundtrack. So they both kind of swapped it out and did some of that type of stuff. But this is definitely a good hit, and Ice Cube kind of kills this song also. So it's a good concept to get both of them doing that. So it's a good concept, real electric kind of dynamic beat. The third single is You Better Recognize, and this features Sam Snead. Now, this has Dr. Dre on background vocals on here. He kind of does like ad-libs and that type of stuff. It's basically just a Sam Snead song. This is kind of a glaring, kind of shrill G-funk bop, I would have to say. It has some solid emphasis, but it's kind of like a vanilla kind of 90s Cali bump of a song, I would have to say. It definitely has some Cali bump on here. It's definitely one that you could play in your vehicle and have that knock as far as that kind of goes. It's very 90s-esque, just the kind of G-funk hit that you would play in a lot of senses. Good song to roll out to and stunt to back in those days as far as that kind of goes. I see it as kind of vanilla nowadays. I definitely would have liked Snoop Dogg on a song like this. I definitely think a song like this probably should have had Snoop Dogg on here, but I don't really know too well who Sam Snead kind of is. I like the concept of him being on a song like this. This is a quality Dre beat, but it kind of made me wish that like Daz or Corrupt or like Snoop Dogg would have been on a song like this. But it's a good emphasis. This is probably like, I think Sam Snead was one of the next cats that was going to blow up after like Dog Pound and some of that type of stuff, but he just kind of disappeared. But this is a good hit, but it's just vanilla for a cat that just kind of had a more pedestrian kind of career as far as that kind of went. But it is a good gem, I would have to say. So there's 15 songs in this album, and out of those 15, I wound up recommending to you 9. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend those 9 songs. Those 9 songs would be Murder Was the Case remix, Natural Born Killers, What Would You Do, Who Got Some Gangsta Shit, Come Up to My Room, 21 Jump Street, Horny, One More Day, and You Better Recognize. So talk about some of these. Like Murder Was the Case remix is a real deafening kind of song. Definitely like this one of the best songs on the album. The beat is just fantastic on here. The beat is just fantastic on here. It's just a real brooding kind of demonic redo of the original off of Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style. I'd have to say it's just a real contemplative song, and it's really sheer. I just would have to say it's just a good example of that. Like Dr. Dre really outdid himself on this particular hit. It's just a real demonic kind of one. It has a real kind of evil sounding feel about it. And it's just a classic kind of sound to how like a song that would encompass like a movie soundtrack actually kind of feel. This is just a real powerfully emphasized one. This really feels like some horrorcore kind of Snoop Dogg, and this works pretty damn well. This is just an effectual beat, and this is probably one of the best, obviously one of the best on the album. Dr. Dre definitely needed to have more beats on here. He just kind of was minimal on this project, kind of typical of how he sometimes does. But I look after this is just a powerful one, just nailed the execution that well. So that's just a good concept. Who Got Some Gangsta Shit's a pretty nice one. This has Snoop Dogg and the Dog Pound on here, and it also has some other cats like Lil C Style and Young Swoop G. So this is a pretty nice one. This is like a drowsy kind of 40-ounce song, I would have to say. It's kind of some regular day antics, and just some regular day antics definitely, and it's just a good summer laze, I would have to say. This is just kind of a dreary, kind of drowsy type summer type song for California and just West Coast or just warm weather in general type thing. I would definitely have to say good song, definitely. Like I was saying, for some 40 ounces and just beer swilling and that type of stuff, just really just appreciating the sights, having a good zigzag joint, something like that. Just a real kind of lazy kind of day, just regular type stuff as far as that kind of goes. Definitely like the pedestrian kind of feel of this one, but it's not pedestrian in a bad way. This is a Superfly beat that works pretty well. So this is just a good concept to kind of get here. Then this is a good reason why Snoop Dogg needed to be on this album more. It's just kind of the concept that these are just the songs that Snoop Dogg are on, or the songs that Snoop Dogg are on here are some of the best on here, and this is just a good concept of seeing that. So it's a good concept to definitely get. Come Up to My Room is definitely a good highlight. Now there are some R&B songs on here, not all of them hit, but this is definitely a good example of one that hits extremely well. Come Up to My Room with Jodeci, and then the Dog Pound, which I can't see as much why it says the Dog Pound on here, just because Daz is really not on the song. It's just Corrupt, but I still think it's a pretty excellent song. This is a satin smooth kind of G-Funk ladies entree, I would have to say. I just would definitely feel about that for this particular song. It's got some great melodies on here, and it's just a snappy hit song. So this is one, kind of an R&B tune, but it just kind of has like that 90s kind of residential house party type feel about it. Just good little bop to kind of have for like some bumping kind of. This is a good example of like a bumping kind of house party track to have when the ladies are looking good at some house parties and that type of stuff. Just definitely kind of has that pep. I would almost say this could be a club song, but I definitely see it as more of like a residential kind of big house party sense. Definitely like the appeal of it. Just the melodies on this song are just really great on here. Corrupt kills his verse. It's just an overall great song. Probably one of the album's best. I feel like this is just a killer highlight. I definitely would have to say. 21 Jump Street's another highlight on here. This is kind of like another makeshift type song, kind of similar to One More Day. It's just a little bit more hop and bop-esque, but I still feel like it's pretty mellow. This is just kind of a hop and bop kind of sunny day pep, I would have to say. It's got a regular day feel about it, and it's just kind of some breezy day commute, I would have to say, and it's just overall pretty nice. So they introduce another new cat on here, and his name is Trey D. He goes sometimes by Big Trey D, and he's a part of the East Siders that Snoop Dogg kind of had. They have some albums out that I'm going to get to, but this is just a good overall highlight. Definitely like this one. It's kind of a lazy, sunny day that just has a lot of appeal towards it. So this is another song that Snoop Dogg kills real well. Probably one of my more favorite recent songs. Like I've owned this album for a few years now, but definitely one of the songs I like more upon listening to it again is Horny. This is by B. Rezel, and I definitely like this one pretty well. This is a good 90s alternative. This is a good 90s alternative to Nate Dogg, I would have to say. It's a good residential gem, definitely, and it's a slow jam, but it connects extremely well. So this is a good example. There are some good R&B bops on here. They do pull it off sometimes, but I kind of feel like this is just a good kind of essential one that just works extremely well. This is a good bopish kind of one where it's like a mid-tempo kind of slow jam, where it is a slow jam, but the effectual behind it is just not like a ballad-esque type songs. I kind of feel like there were a lot of ballads in the 90s, but this is a good example of one that just has some jive and electricity towards it that just works real well. It's too bad that it's really not too well known what happened to B. Rezel, because he really nailed this song. So that's a good example of that. And then I would have to say I think that takes care of it. So to talk about the 6 songs I didn't enjoy, basically a few of these, like I didn't really appreciate the Jewel songs that well. I do like the fact that she's one of the songstresses for like Death Row Records at the time, but her songs were just not nailed that well. They were just kind of more drawn out, and they just kind of felt like more like speech type songs that just didn't really work that well. I just didn't really see the execution behind those. I was really expecting something with a little bit more hit potential, like Horny or Come Up to My Room or something like that, but Joel just didn't deliver on that front. The DJ Quick song had one of the worst beats on the album. Dollars and Cents was just not a very good hit of a song, and just didn't really have a good execution of a beat, and it just really felt like ripped out of the 1980s or something like that. That just was kind of, I mean, it wasn't boom bap, but it just didn't really have the quality of what was kind of going along with it. Just there were some poor ones on here. Like I feel like the remaining three songs, like DJ Quick song, Slip Capone and CPO song, The Eulogy, and then East Side, West Side. These are all just kind of pedestrian kind of ones that just kind of fill out an album when you just have lesser known cats that just don't really move up much past like the movie soundtrack, and this is the only song that you know them for. So I just didn't really see the execution in any of these three songs. I mean, I know DJ Quick a little bit better, but I was kind of expecting a better song from him because he can be on some hits, and he did. I want to say he did some California or G-Funk type stuff pretty well, but this was just not a good example of that. Dollars and Cents. And then I didn't really like the R&B song. I really didn't like the R&B song by Danny Boy. This is just kind of a poor one. I definitely think Nate Dogg and B. Rozelle just did so much better with the song. It just was not really. I kind of felt like Come When I Call was just kind of a yearning ballad that just didn't have too much powerful emphasis about it. It was just the production work was just not that really entertaining as much. So I kind of felt like that one was just kind of a dud in terms of electricity that it kind of didn't have. So that's just kind of the concept about it. But yeah, I would have to say, I mean, me liking it, I liked more songs on this album than I thought I was going to. Me liking 9 songs out of 15 on here, that's pretty good. So I am going to kind of up the score just because for the most part, it's not common nowadays for me to like over half of an album on a movie soundtrack. So I'd have to say, for the most part, it's kind of sporadic just because you always get different cats and just different styles and that type of stuff. So I just would have to say, me liking 9 out of 15, which is about 3/5 of the album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 7.5 out of 10. I'm going to up the score a little bit just because I like the effectualness of it. This is a death row kind of damn near classic. I feel like if it would have just had Dr. Dre beats a little bit more and like a good Snoop Dogg single on here, I definitely feel like Snoop Dogg should have been on a single on here. I mean, I know that they were trying to promote the Dog Pound, but I think Snoop Dogg should have taken another victory lap kind of year and just done another hit song to kind of give these folks as far as that kind of went while he took a break. But that didn't happen. But I feel like it's still it's carved out and it's more original and innovative, and it just hits harder than I thought it would. So it's definitely the concept. It is a winner. It just drags along a little bit just with some of these sporadic kind of songs and just weaker emphasis from some of the other folks. But all of the major death row artists, I would Nate Dogg, the Dog Pound, Dr. Dre, Sam Snead, some of these folks with like the Dr. Dre and Daz, some of these folks with like the Dr. Dre and Daz Dillinger beats just hit a lot heavier. So this is a pretty well-rounded project. It's not perfect, but it's definitely one of the better ones, I would have to say. So in terms of that, 7.5 out of 10. The social score, I would have to say, I'm going to give the social score like an 8.75 out of 10. I'm going to give the social score of this album like an 8.75 out of 10 because I definitely feel like the social value of this particular project is pretty high. There's just some winning songs on here, like the Ice Cube and Dr. Dre song is like an immediate hit. I feel like the Dog Pound really delivered on all their songs. Snoop Dogg has some winning songs on here on some great beats and stuff like that. Just some really kind of killer horrorcore kind of G-Funk type style that just hits pretty damn well. Just some great stuff. Sam Snead had a surprising hit on here. There's some surprising R&B like Come Up to My Room and Horny and some of those type ones. So it just has a lot more surprising vowels on here than to be expected. This is definitely considering that it's not just by Snoop Dogg or by Dr. Dre or by the Dog Pound or something like that. It's just pretty well rounded. So it's pretty near the cream of the crop in terms of the social score, I would have to say. But in terms of the future, that's kind of difficult just because Death Row has kind of imploded. But then Snoop Dogg kind of went back and rebought Death Row Records. So I just don't know what he's been up to with it. But I'd have to say this is a movie soundtrack, so there's not really a sequel or anything like that. But this is a good project here. Definitely recommend getting it, even if you have to pay like $35 or something like that for it.